ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Nearly 2 years ago, Erin Patterson served beef Wellington to her family at that now infamous mushroom lunch, and her murder trial has finally begun. I'm Stephen Stockwell. Each day, we're racing straight from court to our Mushroom Case Daily studio to bring you all the evidence from the trial. We'll have a new podcast every evening that court is sitting. To make sure you don't miss new episodes, hit the follow button on the Mushroom Case Daily podcast. You can find it on the ABC Listen app.
It's not been without its ups and downs, but it's a relationship that has endured the test of time. But now the Nationals are breaking away from the Liberal Party, ending the federal coalition. Today, the ABC's chief digital political correspondent, Jacob Greber, on why they couldn't move past their differences and what it means for Australian politics. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily.
This morning, after the discussions that both Susan Lay and I have had over the ensuing period, our party room has got to a position where we will not be re-entering a coalition agreement with the Liberal Party.
And while I have enormous respect for David and his team, it is disappointing that the National Party has decided today to leave the coalition.
This party room is always the National Party room. Our party room has made a decision, a very tough decision. It's not a decision they've taken lightly. A reasonable request was put to a trusted partner and it was refused.
So what this is about taking a deep breath to be able to say to the Australian people that this is a time apart for us to be better, to focus on them.
Jacob, it's been a really long marriage. Really, really, really long, right?
It sure has. Really going back best part of a century.
Yeah.
Now, there have been some ruptures in the past. There was a famous example in the 1980s when the Premier of Queensland, Joh Bjelke-Petersen, tried to go national to become Prime Minister, and so there was a split back in 1987. And there have been other smaller occasions, but we've come to a point in the current cycle where that's no longer tenable for either side and they have gone their own way.
Yeah, but it was a bit of a shock, wasn't it, when the Nationals leader David Littleproud stood up and announced, oh, well, it's all over. I mean, were we expecting that? What did you think?
So it did come as a surprise. People like myself have speculated since May 3 that a period apart might be the way to go for these parties to help them rebuild. They are in a really bad way. Now they're on their own. They'll be able to determine whether they can win those seats back as a separate party. But it's very much in the air as to whether this split will remain in place by the time of the next election.
Okay, all right. So just to explain that a bit more, this comes down to some major policy frictions over the direction the Liberals want to go in and the Nationals want to go in. So what are they? Just explain that.
So the key splits, and David Littleproud went through them, the key policy points that the Nationals were demanding of the Liberals was divestment of supermarkets, so strong powers to break up the big giants.
We've been very principled about that, about the impact it's had on farmers, but the impact it's also had on the Australian consumer, whether they be in Metro.
The Liberals don't like that idea because it's a market intervention. There was a $20 billion regional infrastructure fund that was promised in the lead up to the last election. That was one of those big policy announcements in the middle of the campaign. That was a National Party policy that gave them a very large slush fund of money to spend on infrastructure projects.
A $20 billion fund paying a $1 billion dividend every year above and beyond to change the lives of regional Australians, about employing and training some doctors, to actually filling in some potholes.
And then that brings me to the third bugbear, which is around nuclear power.
In terms of nuclear, we want to see that it is part of a technology agnostic approach to reducing our emissions and our energy grid. You cannot run an economy of the industrial scale the size of Australia on an all renewables approach. You simply can't do it.
Now, the Liberals have different positions on all of those things. Some of them support some or all of those elements. The critical breakdown was actually more that the National Party wanted the agreement to have these policy prescriptions determined. And that was something the Liberals could never accept.
Now, the Nationals sought specific commitments on certain policies. Our perspective is not about the individual policies themselves, but the approach that we said we would take to our party room. Nothing adopted and nothing abandoned.
These agreements are about power sharing, who gets which ministry, how many Nationals are in shadow cabinet. They're not about the policies. And so the Liberals are saying, well, we need to do a whole lot of deep thinking about our own future, and pre-committing on policy via a coalition agreement is simply untenable. So that was becoming a test for Susan Lee internally on the Liberal side, that there was no way Liberals would have accepted her agreeing to such conditions.
So it's a sort of fight at its core between the two leaders, is it? Between Susan Lee, the new Liberal leader, and David Littleproud.
I would say it's actually more about David Littleproud and his leadership.
Yes.
And the complexity he's got with keeping his somewhat reduced National Party. They're down to 19 seats. They've lost 3 since 2022. And so he's under pressure to keep that party together. And there's a large group or a significant group that wants to walk away or ditch completely commitments to net zero by 2050. And so nuclear is the way he can keep that story together. He says the only way to net zero is with nuclear. And so he's recalibrating his position. Given that voters nationally rejected nuclear so thoroughly on May 3, he's now moving to a position of saying, well, let's try and lift the moratorium on nuclear power. Let's make that our policy rather than the very ambitious, much more specific policy that Peter Dutton had of 7 nuclear power stations in specific locations. It is very much about Littleproud managing his party room.
But as you alluded to, they could get back together, right? If some of these frictions were actually worked out. He hasn't closed the door altogether.
No, they've been very careful about the way they've worded that, and self-interest is really the primary driver here.
And I respect the principled position that Susan is in, and I gave her that commitment that I'll work every day with her to try and rebuild that relationship to the point where we can re-enter a coalition before the next election.
The Nationals' door remains open and our door remains open. And we look forward with optimism to rejoining at some point in the future.
Neither party forms government in future without being in a coalition. They simply don't have the numbers to do it in their own right. Labor would be in power indefinitely if the coalition does not come back together again. That's just raw, brutal maths. There are also certain key members of the National Party who do quite well out of the coalition, remembering that the coalition runs as a single ticket in Senate races. So would the National Party hold seats, for instance, Senate seats in Victoria, if they weren't running under the Liberal National brand but were running as National Party only? Questions like that will really weigh on individual senators and members of Parliament as this term progresses. The big fight in these coalition agreements is always over how many shadow cabinet spots the National Party is entitled to, and that's worked out based on their electoral performance. Now all of them look like they'll go to the Liberal Party.
But that was what I was slightly confused about too, Jacob, is that the Liberal Party will still be the opposition though, right? So the Nationals are no longer the opposition.
The Nationals are essentially a minority party now. His Majesty's official opposition looks like it will definitely be the Liberal Party.
Okay.
And so they get the spoils that come with being the official opposition, and that is additional staffing, additional pay that reflects their responsibilities. Yeah. Those things will not go to the National Party. The National Party is now more like, say, the Greens or groups of crossbenchers.
That's because the Liberal Party have more seats still?
That's right.
And good to remember, isn't it, Jacob, that across the life of this coalition, which, as we said, has been around for a really long time, the Nationals have always represented quite a different voter than the Liberals.
It's been part of the magic sauce, and very long-running coalition governments, I'm thinking here of John Howard's, benefited from having a clear, I guess in today's terms, you'd talk about it as market or brand distinction. The National Party was very strong in the regions. It talked differently about issues. It focused on topics like, for instance, trade. Tim Fischer was a trade minister who worked on trade deals for farmers. And then you had the Liberal Party, which took care of and represented the more affluent parts of the country, who didn't necessarily have the same concerns as the National Party's constituency, but the two formed a very strong coalition that Labor struggled to break. Now, it seems to have flipped the other way in that a lot of the Liberals complain that their identity is being essentially beaten down by the National Party or the LNP identity, which is more sceptical about climate change policy. It's more sceptical about the drive to renewables. And so this is where this fissure has come apart. It's very much an ongoing fight over how best to manage climate change policy and whether the renewables approach, which is popular in cities, will continue. David Littleproud made a point at his press conference today of talking about why the bush doesn't like renewables, why they're paying an unfair price in terms of farmland being given over to panels or wind farms and transmission going through rural areas. He makes a big point of that, and that's a sign that that is an issue he feels hurts him if he doesn't talk about it.
You know what? We all want to reduce emissions. But to those people that are living in capital cities today, I just ask you to understand the burden you're asking us to bear. I ask you to get in a car, come out and see what we're enduring out there. They have lost their social licence, renewables. They are tearing up our landscape. They are tearing up your food security. And they are tearing families apart.
You've mentioned there, Jacob, that the Liberal Party cannot form government without the Nationals. So just put that into more context for me. How damaging is this move, or could this move, be for Susan Lee?
Well, she would have been in a very difficult and very fraught position had she agreed to what the National Party was wanting, as in a prescriptive coalition agreement which prejudges issues such as divestment powers or nuclear power. That would have been seen inside the Liberal Party as a capitulation, and I suspect she would have been immediately under a lot of pressure. Remember, she only won narrowly over Angus Taylor for the leadership, 29 votes to 25. So she's on very tough ground as well. Some might say she has a poisoned chalice. And so for her to have capitulated to the National Party in the way that was being set up would have been a really poor start for her. It would have wounded her from the beginning. So in a sense, Littleproud has put her in that position by insisting on what he's doing, and I think she has determined that she needs to be the leader of the Liberal Party first and foremost.
Yeah, wow. Well, what an incredible shift in the political landscape. What do you think we should watch out for next, Jacob?
Well, it'll be fascinating to see how the National Party organises itself around big issues. Will they make room for compromise on topics going forward? And there's another element too. The Labor Party in the Senate now has a third option. What we were all expecting was that to get legislation through Parliament, Labor would need to join with the Greens. It would be Labor plus the Greens to pass legislation. There is now a new way, Labor plus the Liberal Party, or Labor plus the National Party and a group of crossbenchers. So this is manna from heaven for the Labor Party. They now have several ways to get legislation through the Parliament.
Jacob Greber is the ABC's chief digital political correspondent. This episode was produced by Sydney Peed and Adair Shepherd. Audio production by Sam Dunn. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. Thanks for listening.